It's been nearly 2 weeks since 4 members of the U.S. Special Forces were killed in Niger during an ISIS ambush. And yesterday, President Donald Trump was asked about not having mentioned their deaths.
Why haven't we heard anything from you so far about the soldiers that were killed in Niger, and what do you have to say about that?
I've written them personal letters. They've been sent, or they're going out tonight, but they were written during the weekend. I will, at some point during the period of time, call the parents and the families, because I have done that traditionally. I felt very, very badly about that. I always feel badly. It's the toughest calls I have to make are the calls where this happens. Soldiers are killed. It's a very difficult thing. Now, it gets to a point where, you know, you make 4 or 5 of them in one day is a very, very tough day. For me, that's by far the toughest. So the traditional way, if you look at President Obama and other presidents, most of them didn't make calls. A lot of them didn't make calls. I like to call when it's appropriate, when I think I'm able to do it.
I really can't. I'm so sorry. I cannot help myself. Really? It's tough? It's tough for you? It's tough for him.
Yeah.
It's tough for him. I wonder if it's tough as the parents who lost their sons and daughters, or the brothers and sisters and wives and kids who lost someone. Can he make a moment, perhaps just one, not about himself? It's really hard to watch. Moments later, NBC's, yeah.
No, wait, no, hold on, Megan. Not
It's
just that.
unbelievable.
I mean, that's offensive enough.
It's offensive.
That's offensive enough. What is doubly offensive is that in that moment when Mike Barnicle, when he had refused to even mention these heroes before, when it finally comes up, he makes it about himself, saying, boy, it's really tough.
For him.
And for him, yeah. And then he brings up his petty, long-running, insecure, pathetic, sad, weak dispute with the 44th President of the United States. Donald Trump makes their death, makes their sacrifice about himself, saying, boy, that sure is tough for me to pick up a phone and call a parent who will never see their son or daughter again. And then he finds a way to try to attack Barack Obama, which just shows, again, you talked about character before. I talked about the Beatitudes. This man is such a terrible role model and character reference for all of our children, for all of our grandchildren. I don't know where to start, and that clip lays it out.
Yeah.
Joe, this is so sad. This is the presidency of the United States we're talking about. That's the president of the United States we just saw on television, lowering the office every day. It seemingly.
This is rock bottom when he speaks like this about our heroes.
I know personally a family that Barack Obama called who had lost their son in Afghanistan. Is Josh Ernst still with us?
Josh.
Yeah, Mike, I'm still here.
Josh, you know too. You lived it. You saw what an emotional, wrenching experience it is for a president of the United States, a man, to call the families of the fallen. And it was done repeatedly, not only by Barack Obama, but by George W. Bush and past presidents as well. And for that to occur yesterday, for this sitting president of the United States to so demean the office and by implication try to demean his predecessors is really a new low.
You know, Mike, I did see President Obama in a variety of circumstances show his enormous respect and for those who had paid the ultimate sacrifice for our country. In doing so, President Obama also revealed the enormous burden that is carried by the commander-in-chief. in terms of making the kinds of life and death decisions that are going to have an impact on people who have signed up to serve and sacrifice for our country. That's the other notable thing about President Trump, is he has time and time again looked for ways to actually devolve that decision-making down the food chain so that he doesn't have to bear that responsibility. But, you know, I remember vividly that President Obama, you know, on Veterans Day, as previous presidents have done, have traveled to Arlington National Cemetery, given an address to pay tribute to those who had paid the ultimate sacrifice for our country, gone to the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier to lay a wreath there. But something else that President Obama did was, after giving that speech and before he left the cemetery, would actually go to Section 60. This is the part of the cemetery that's dedicated to preserving the remains of those in our military who've given their lives in the conflict in Iraq and Afghanistan. And he did that because he felt these were the decisions that he was making as commander-in-chief, but he also did that in private. We didn't give press reporters a heads up in advance that he was going to go to that part of the cemetery. And I even got reporters coming into my office saying, please tell us when President Obama is going to go and to Section 60. We would like to photograph him there. And President Obama's preference was always to not seek that attention. And I'm not seeking to martyr President Obama here. What I'm seeking to illustrate is that presidents in both parties understood that when we're talking about the sacrifice that America's men and women are paying for our country, that it's not about them personally. It's not about the president. It's not about their personal feelings.
Right.
It's not about an effort to try to convince the country that somehow they are showing the same kind of bravery that those men and women in uniform are showing.
Right.
No, in fact, what we need to do is we need to honor and pay tribute to their sacrifice. And that is what President Obama and other presidents have done. And unfortunately, President Trump seems incapable of actually doing that.
Completely.
Well, you know, Mika, President Trump also talked about his predecessors, talked about, and we just saw a tweet there from a general talking about what 44 and 43 did and how they cared deeply. Obviously, I had many concerns with George W. Bush, but never his humanity.
No.
And Nicole Wallace privately told us that when they were writing speeches for George W. Bush about the fallen, they knew that that it was going to be a challenge in the speech because he would always break down, and a lot of times when he was preparing for it, he would start weeping, and we saw that with his Secretary of Defense, who actually, Bob Gates, who actually near the end, every time he would talk about the sacrifice of the men and women in uniform, he would break down and start weeping in public, and actually said that's one of the reasons he had to leave that position, because the pain was so real and so close to him. And for Donald Trump to just flippantly say, "Oh boy, it's tough to make those calls when you have to make more than a couple in a day," and then again suggesting that none of the former commander or the chiefs did it. Again, I know we're going on about this, but sometimes there is a moment that adds all the context a story needs. And when it comes to Donald Trump, this is that story, that he made the deaths of our American heroes about himself having to make a tough phone call, and then attacked Barack Obama and his other predecessors for not doing it.
Can you imagine a president in recent memory, in our lifetimes, that would ever complain about making those phone calls? Moments after that answer, and then we'll get you Bill Kristol, NBC's Peter Alexander pressed the president on his claim about Obama.
Quick question. Earlier you said that President Obama never called the families of fallen soldiers. How can you make that claim?
I don't know if he did. No. I was told that he didn't often, and a lot of presidents don't. They write letters. I do. Excuse me, Peter. I do a combination of both. Sometimes it's a very difficult thing to do, but I do a combination of both. President Obama, I think, probably did sometimes, and maybe sometimes he didn't. I don't know. That's what I was told. All I can do is ask my generals. Other presidents did not call. They'd write letters, and some presidents didn't do anything.
This is
Let's
not a good
underline
person.
it one more time. That's a demonstrable lie, as Josh
horrible,
Earnest just told us.
horrible.
That President Obama and others, of course, called the families of the fallen. Bill Kristol, this is at once the most difficult, serious, and somber duty of a president, and also the easiest and most obvious thing to do, right? I mean, these are the ceremonial aspects of the presidency that he seems to fail at, whether it's talking the right way about hurricane victims, going to and being with the people and showing empathy. But this, to not only to say that this is difficult for me, to make this about me, as he always does, but also to then try to implicate previous presidents falsely again, it's beyond the pale.
No, as Mike said, it's a new low. I mean, even if, incidentally, previous presidents haven't always behaved perfectly, what president would say that? It's totally irrelevant, right? You want to defend the dignity of the presidency.
What good, honest person, what good
Yeah, it'd be
person
like saying-
with a sense of duty and honor to this country, what person who loves America would say something like that? Let's
No,
just say it.
right.
There's nothing good
No, it's
about
terrible.
It's a horrible.
And I would
not
say
a
this,
good
I really
person.
felt my wife Susan said this to me last night. I mean, nothing is worth it. I mean, she's had this view for quite a while, but Gorsuch isn't worth it. Tax cuts
Nothing
isn't
is
worth
worth
it.
it.
You know, being more pro-Israel than Obama isn't worth it. And Republicans, and my fellow Republicans, if I can still say that, and conservatives, and people like Mitch McConnell and decent senators need to stand up, and they really should stand up today and say,
Together.
this is terrible. I mean, this is, what
When
kind
you-
of-
and-
and it really is terrible. I mean, the degradation of our public life, of our civic discourse that's happening in this presidency, none of the little policy victories or even the bigger policy victories is worth it.
And Mika, when you listen to presidents talk about the duty of welcoming home the remains or talking to a family of a fallen soldier, it's the most solemn and serious thing they do. When they go to Dover Air Force Base in the middle of the night, as Josh knows, President Obama has done. When George W. Bush went to Walter Reed to talk to the victims, the soldiers at the
Exactly.
wars he initiated, it's the heaviest and most difficult thing they do. They would never talk in such a flippant way about an issue like this.
And there are people
it's
serving
really-
right now.
It's really it shows so much about him, both making it about himself, but then also the gratuitous and sort of blaming of his, justifying yourself by then sort of gratuitous and false attacks on your predecessors who were president of the United States and who behaved decently and appropriately in honoring our fallen soldiers and their families. Ugh.
Coming up, Senator John McCain seems to call out President Trump and at least some of his supporters in an emotional event attended by former Vice President Joe Biden. We'll play his remarks. Plus, the president says the military shouldn't have to be distributing food and water in storm-battered Puerto Rico. We'll get reaction when Morning Joe comes right back.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.